Hello out there. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I have Gareth with me. Say hi, Gareth.
Hello, I'm up here on the moon with Willie.
That's right. Willie's always traveling. He's just our interstellar traveler. But yeah, we have people all over from Florida, Hawaii, Chicago, Seattle, Pennsylvania, Chicago. You just want to learn about adverbs. I mean, that's what it said on the brief, right? We're going to talk about that part of speech that gets a lot of, I don't know, of a bad rap, if you want to say it. There's a lot of comments about it. The classic quote is Stephen King's "The road to hell is paved with adverbs." So, what is going on with adverbs? Why do we even have this parts of speech? Should you never use them? Yes, of course you should use them sometimes, but we're going to get all into all of that with different tips. As we go in, feel free to chime in as well. I'm going to give a lot of bad examples of writing because I love to write poorly on purpose, because that's like, I don't know, it's like making an excuse for myself when you do that. You're like, I did it on purpose. That's okay. But no, it's fun. But yes, these are going to be exaggerations. So just to point out particular problems, but I'm going to try to approach it from as many angles as I can think. But if you out there listening or there in the chat, you can think of other reasons why adverbs are either a good or a bad thing, please let me know. Oh, you're only here to see my shirt. They're so sweet. I actually made this one. It's a sandhill cranes. I love sandhill cranes. Yeah.
It's like, joke's on you, next time Daniel's shirtless.
Oh, please no. The joke would be on me then. All right. Okay, so one reason why you want to avoid adverbs is because they can prop up weak adjectives. Let's look at some examples of this. How does an adverb prop up a weak adjective? Oh, I don't know, something like that dress was really extremely nice. Yeah, that's terrible. Um, well, why would you use a generic descriptive like nice anyway? What does that even mean? That dress was nice, right? So even if you say really extremely, well, you're not even propping it up. You're just kind of enhancing the fact it's not a strong word in the first place. The secret is Gareth is always shirtless. I can guarantee you that is not the case. Although it might be right now. It's very warm where he is. How warm is it in the UK right now, Gareth?
I was going to say, you may be breaching a little too close to the truth there, Mop Bucket, right now, but I'm not. I'm not actually, but it is. It's scorching. We're in the middle of a heat wave, so it's about 40 Celsius, 100 and something Fahrenheit here, and we're not built for this.
No, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if he's sitting in a bucket of ice, like just to like trying to calm himself down. Ah, you promised you wouldn't read my writing on air. Well, we all have our moments there, Stephen. But ultimately, yes, we do not want to use adverbs to try to prop up weaker adjectives. Instead, find a bolder descriptions. I feel like people have watched Destination Unknown or some of our other writing props too much that now they're just looking for reasons to use what we give them.
So I'm going to make it work. Challenge accepted.
I could see this actually working if you are trying to have somebody hedge. And that is a way to use adverbs. Adverbs, because you can stack adverbs on top of each other. And the more adverbs stacked on top, it's like the more waffly the person is being, or they're just being redundant, which is a sign of waffling. So you could maybe in dialogue see somebody be like, that dress, it's extremely nice. I could see that potentially working.
I could also see this working from the kind of written perspective of a child. You know,
Mm,
whether they're actually saying it as part of, if you're in the kid's POV and it's actually the narrative prose, or somebody reading a letter, for example, that's been scrolled by a child, would work. I think.
yeah, exactly. Exactly. And that gets to the point that we're going to get to eventually. I'm going to start on the negative side of adverbs and then we're going to move to the positive side of adverbs. But even these negative examples, there might be, there's a use for almost anything. Or something like the boat was very big. Instead of very big, you could do something like huge, gigantic, enormous, monstrous, something like that. Big is a rather generic description. It ultimately does not serve its it doesn't earn its spot on the page as much as another word could. And very is a particularly, see, there's an adverb. It's a particularly weak adverb a lot of the time. I would say if you want to like find one to just stamp out of existence, very is not a bad one to look for because it rarely earns its spot, in my opinion. It's certainly overused. I don't know. Maybe I have more of an agenda about very than you do, Gareth.
No, yes, no. It's one of these nah, yeah, nah moments. Yeah, I mean, when it comes to adverbs, I may be jumping the gun a little on some of the things that you'll raise here today. But when it comes to me and dealing with adverbs, a lot of the time I'm just like, why use two words when you can use one? You know,
Yep.
and very big. There's no need for that whatsoever.
Yep. Yep. Somebody's asking a technical question. Does the exclusion of adverbs play with the reading level scores in Autocrit? It would, because reading level is going to be based on length of sentences. Also, when you're modifying words, you are uh, quite often making the sentence more complex. So yes, it would. I'm sure.
Yeah, I think more complex adverbs will hurt it even more as well. You know,
Yep.
like inexplicably versus really is one's more complicated of a word than the other.
I think I have seen this that Mark Twain suggested replacing very with damn to get your editor to remove them. That's awesome. I mean, pretty much, yeah. That's I think how editors feel. All right, so let's talk about weak verbs. Like the man walked super quickly. Excuse me. Same problem as we were saying with the adjectives, right? That word walked. And to Garrett's point, well, I have three words when instead of walked, you can simply say they raced, they whatever, scampered, they scurried, they whatever you want, hurried. Well, some verbs might draw more attention to themselves than are necessary, but there are other options besides walk to indicate a brisk walk. Or you could simply, if you want to keep an adverb, at least trim it down and say he walked briskly versus super quickly. Let's not use two adverbs when one adverb will work. But I think this is one reason why Stephen King talks about them like dandelions, because not only can adverbs make up for weaker adjectives and just kind of or verbs or nouns, we're going to get to that, excuse me, and just add a lot of bloat, but they can bloat themselves because adverbs can modify adverbs. So it can really just get out of control in a hurry. Super quickly. Ouch. I know. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say how how out of control it gets, the writing almost becomes comedic in that
It
really kind of
does.
cringe way.
Yep.
But it could this kind of thing that could be super cringe if it's meant into completely honestly, but can be used for comedic effect too. Like
Mhm.
here, the man walked super quickly. It makes me think, oh, okay, so super quickly is that like a superhero? And then I thought of a superhero who, instead of being called like speedster or anything like that, was just called super quick.
Yeah. Or even also how people talk sometimes. Sometimes people talk because people talk in redundancies and things like that. And all or it there's a certain amount of lack of precision or you know what I mean, lack of care that could potentially work in somebody's rhetorical style to say they walked super quickly. Perhaps.
I think there's a good what you say there in speech too. I just want to pull this up because it was a pretty good comment there from Escray. I find adverbs are a good way to make a character sound young.
I think so.
I think that's very, very true. We've got MJ saying, yeah, kids say
Kids
really
say
and
really and
actually
actually.
all the time, and it's a good way not just for young characters, kids kind of kid speak, in that sense to make that sound more authentic, but also to lend a sense of immaturity to characters as well.
Mhm.
You think of those characters that are like literally, just constantly talking like that. You look at them as though they are immature. They're not exactly mature characters. So you can dump that in.
And part of that is because kids don't have the same vocabulary level. And so adverbs do prop up their word choice to some degree. I mean, granted, different children are different, but you know what I mean? Like, I think that's one reason why children tend to use more adverbs. But I'm not a linguistic expert or anything. All right. Weak nouns. Okay. So this is another element. Like the building was really ugly and very run down. There's a lot of adverbs going on there. And ultimately, why do you even have such a pointless word as building? I mean, it's so generic and just flat. And you could have something else there, like it's a shack or something. I mean, I don't even know what kind of building this is, right? But you could trim this down a lot, save yourself some energy, and it just wouldn't hurt me so much to read a sentence like this. Again, we have the redundancies, all throughout. Really ugly, you don't really need the really, like, what's the difference between really ugly and just ugly? And if you wanna say that, maybe ugly, you have a better adjective, right, for it. Hovel, see, there you go. Yeah. You could literally just replace all of this with just hovel, and the same meaning would get across. So yes, a strong noun or a more specific noun can do you a world of good for saving the time of the reader and you know just better prose. Or the hideous, completely ugly creature growled.
Oh dear.
I'm just trying to make Gareth cringe as much as possible on this. I kind of wish he was on cam so I could just see him like his editor brain just like crawl. But yes, same sort of thing. Like it's not necessary. Why are you saying creature? Creature is just a generic noun for something you can't identify, but you could say beast, monster, something like that, which would get you closer to hideous or completely ugly. Don't generally monsters aren't attractive, right? And so you just wouldn't have to prop it up with all of this stuff going on. All right, I'm gonna move forward. There is horror, and then there is horror. Yes. Of course, you have weak adverbs, so you can actually, and we've been doing that a fair amount. You've seen some examples. Modify adverbs that aren't serving much of a purpose with other adverbs. Like that person was really very mean. I mean, really and very, neither are doing a whole lot in the sentence, and then they're just turning up the temperature a lot more on not much of anything. So yeah, the person was mean works pretty well. You could say very mean maybe is a bit, gives you some extreme. You really don't need the really. And so putting the very to prop up really, no, just get rid of the really or get rid of both of them. And again, this is where adverbs can become like dandelions. All right, let's move on. Redundancies. Yes, adverbs sometimes serve no purpose in terms of meaning. They're not trying to prop up or add meaning. They're just repeating the same thing because you did not realize that you are stating the same thing twice. Like, he briefly glanced at the briefcase. Of course, to Garrett's point earlier, this could be really funny depending on the context, right? I'm thinking it's like Douglas Adams sort of style writing, and it's like he briefly glanced at the briefcase of his briefs. you know, but but obviously you don't have to put briefly because a glance is something you do just for a short moment. So briefly is not in fact propping up a weak verb. Glanced is fine. Glanced is a clear verb that tells us, it's not just looked, right? Because you could say he briefly looked should be replaced with glanced. But sometimes people will put in that strong verb like glanced and then still put in that adverb as if you need to have the clarity. And briefly not necessary, and you're just wasting somebody's time.
Yeah, just adding more words where they're not needed.
Exactly. And our philosophy here, which is a general philosophy of good editing, is every word needs to earn their spot on the page. And ultimately, adverbs can earn their spot on the page. We're going to get there. Don't worry. We're beating up on adverbs right now, but they do serve their purpose. But they tend to be an easy go to try to either solve a problem or just kind of out of laziness that makes them easy fodder to be edited out. It was a super quick glance. He did briefly. Yes, exactly. But again, when that is something to bring up, right? In for comedic effect, sometimes having redundancies can be really funny. Um, and so that isn't something to never use, but it has to be intentional. Otherwise, it's comedic, as Gareth was saying earlier. And if you're not intending it to be comedic, it's just going to come across as annoying or poor.
Yeah, still like one of the most comedic I've seen. Well, always makes me laugh. Stephen reminded me there. He commented he died to death. Was the I can't remember
Oh,
which
you know
movie it's
what? My
from.
son says that. My son says that. It's something he says. He says it all the time. He doesn't say he died. He says they killed it to its death, and it's just the cutest thing.
That's
He's
it.
5,
I
and
was
it's
trying to
just so
remember.
funny. It's just like he wants to be so dramatic. It's like he killed it to its death.
It's like which movie it was from, but just the line. It's like I'm going to kill you till you die from it. It just
Right?
makes me laugh.
Yeah, I don't even want to correct him because I just think it's so endearing. So I don't. sprinter swiftly sprinting in a sprintily sort of way. Exactly, right? That's ridiculous, but it could potentially work if that's you're going for some sort of absurdist sentence. Then there is what I call the twist. This is when an adverb completely throws off the flow of your reasoning while you're reading, because the adverb changes the context of everything that came up to that point in the sentence, and it doesn't follow. And so you have to kind of rethink everything you read up to that point. And you might be like, I don't know what you mean. Here's an example. The ferocious tiger displayed its claws and teeth as it stared at us peacefully. And you can see here how the adverb is very it's a poor use of it, because unless again you're going for some sort of comedic take where you're like all built up and then it's like, oh, but otherwise what you've done is you've created a sentence where somebody was reading it with a specific sort of way of thinking about it, and now they have to go back and be like, okay, wait, that's not the case. And it's a weird sort of, it just draws so much attention to itself. And you're like, really, do people write like this? I've seen this, not quite as extreme. Again, I'm using extreme examples to demonstrate the point, but it does happen. It happens a lot in dialogue, and we'll get there later. We're gonna get to dialogue, don't worry. But do you ever see this, Gareth, or have you ever come across this?
Not recently, thankfully. Although looking at that, it did make me think. We had the comment there, Beth, thinking about the death stuff was it kills their soul, maybe, and that just killed mine.
Well, that's because if you have a ferocious tiger displaying its claws and teeth and it's peaceful, that's just, what's the point? That's like, what a waste. You had this great build up. You had this great setup. All right, let's talk about dialogue tags. This is a place where adverbs tend to come up rather frequently because people will use adverbs to modify the verb for uh, how the person is talking. And this could be a problem because you can end up with, that is an interesting conclusion, he said extremely violently, which is kind of the same sort of thing we just had with the tiger, right? The sentence you wouldn't read extremely violently. I mean, that's bad in the first place. But beyond that, you're not going to read that is an interesting conclusion, he said extremely violently. Well, now you have to go back and you have to recontextualize that sentence because that's not how you heard it in your head, right? So it's doing a lot of things poorly at the same time. And this is something that I do see fairly common, much more than the last example, where the sentence itself is not clear about the emotional state, and then they throw in some punchy adverb to show you, whoa, they're like in this extreme emotional state, and I didn't get that at all from that sentence, and I have to go back and think of the whole thing over again. And that's just a waste of everybody's time. There are solutions to this. If you find yourself in a situation where you need somebody to say something and they're not wearing their heart on their sleeve, that's fine. Not everybody talks like that. But you need to throw it in the blocking or something beforehand so we have a sense of how that sentence should be heard in our head versus getting the context after the case. It just ruins the flow too much.
Yeah, there's an additional dramatic way of doing that as well. If you don't want to pre-build in the context for how it's said, is have the other characters react to the person as though they were speaking sincerely. The way that the reader interpreted it the first time, the characters respond in that way, and then the other person explodes. I'm being facetious, dimwit. That kind of thing's like, oh,
Mm.
okay, now I get it.
Oh no, that's a good point, right? Yeah, because the question is do the other characters realize it, right? Because if this is somebody who doesn't wear their heart on their sleeve or isn't wearing their heart on their sleeve in that moment, and you might misinterpret what they're saying that way, well, wouldn't the characters interpret it that way? That's really smart. That's true. I agree with that. I like that. He said, sounding like Nick Cage auditioning this next movie.
I was just about to say with the Nick Cage thing, you might have broken the whole concept there, MJ, because that could possibly read exactly like Nicolas Cage.
It's true. And no, but that's the point, is there are people and characters that don't talk with the emotional, the what they're saying and their emotions, there is a disconnect, right? And that could be really fun and interesting, right? Because some people do express themselves in unique ways. And so when they're really angry, well, they actually get kind of silly and sarcastic, right? And but that's like they're livid, right? So, but there are ways you can get that across without just throwing in at the end as some sort of twist. And that being said, why is it he said extremely violently? Wouldn't you want a better verb there potentially versus that? Like, I don't know, he shouted or something, maybe. Or you don't certainly, I don't think you need extremely violently. You might be able to come up with something short as an adverb. So lots of different things to think about with something like that. But let's get into some of the reasons why you might want to use adverbs because we've been beating up on adverbs. One reason you might want to is the rhythm of your sentence. You may find that just from a sound perspective, from the way the cadence of the words, that adverb actually is doing something. And this is very much a your mileage may vary sort of thing. For example, something like to experience a launch would be really amazing. I could see somebody, especially too on the rhetorical style, but the difference between to experience a launch would be amazing, to experience a launch would be really amazing. I could see somebody potentially wanting that rhythm, even though the really is just a filler word and it's not really serving much purpose. This is one of those things, again, the context of the paragraph would matter, the rhetorical style, the character, all that sort of thing.
That could
Do you
be
ever find yourself do you ever find yourself I mean, I think you would. Yeah, you would say there are times you would use a adverb that's basically just a filler just for the sake of that pace, right?
Yeah, sometimes for pacing and emphasis as well, like something like this in everyday speech too. There is a sense of it. The really in this is lending authenticity to a sense of authenticity to the amazing, because terms like amazing, amazing means amazing, like astounding, overwhelming. But nowadays we tend to use it. How was the meal? Oh, it was amazing. Thank you very much. When it was just acceptable, it was good, and people kind of understand that. They know that, and saying, "Oh, it was really amazing," means I'm being genuine with this term that I'm
Mm,
using. So it can be very valid in a situation like that.
that's true too. You can make the case that there is additional meaning. It's not just a complete filler word as well. Sure. All right. Context information. Adverbs do in fact give additional information at times, like I'm so excited to meet my date that I'm getting there early. Adverbs there early, and that's helpful. Like you know, it serves a purpose. It's pretty straightforward, right? um, but this is where I actually have talked to writers before, and they're like, "Well, I make sure that there are no adverbs in my writing," and I'm like, "Oh, you do you? Because that makes it difficult to write a fair amount of sentences. Because you could, in fact, rephrase this and avoid adverbs altogether, but there's really no particular reason to do it that way. This is fairly reasonable speech, wouldn't you say, Gareth?
Yes, 100%. Like it's a key part of adverbs. That's my crux with them. It's pruning. It's not going hog wild with a chainsaw to get rid of them, because sometimes you need them.
I like how they just keep adding to that sentence. Experiencing a launch would be life changing, amazing. Experience a launch would be truly amazing. Yes. But there is something to be said for going back to that. There is something to be said for that emphasis. It does give a sense of authenticity. Sure. All right. Another thing that adverbs can do, which we've been talking about, is realistic dialogue. People do speak this way. So just because we are writers and we're trying to write in a um, more, in a well-crafted fashion, and we're making our art, it doesn't mean that the characters always speak with that amount of level of thought in their words, because that's not how people generally speak. Now, most people, I would say all people would not say that dialogue should resemble actual speech. It should be, in fact, um, a creative interpretation of speech. However, you can get quite realistic with your dialogue to the point where you would have characters speak in inexact ways and hedgy ways, or however it is that would not be how you would want your prose to flow. Now, that being said, sometimes the prose itself takes a somewhat dialogue sort of tact in that it really feels like somebody's telling you a story, in which case almost the whole thing feels like dialogue. And that's just a that's just a style of the author, right? I can think of certain genres, often ones more for like young adult or kind of those, um, you know, more comedic tone ones where the point of view is really cheeky or something like that. But they can often throw in more adverbs than you would expect in a lean and mean, hard sci-fi, because they are trying to sound like somebody telling you a story. So an example of something like this would be, I'm really surprised you completely dropped the ball. It doesn't sound like anything that particularly stands out. If you were writing a sentence in your prose, where and you would say, the woman was really surprised, the man completely did. You probably wouldn't want to write like that in your prose, because it just you're not. Those words are not really adding much. However, in dialogue, this is how people often speak. Deep point of view can sometimes come off like dialogue. Exactly. Well, I like this. This is why you trust Autocrit's evaluation of adverbs, because you know it's to retain. This is true. A nice feature about Autocrit is that we don't just point out every adverb and expect you to say, get rid of all of them, because we wouldn't anyway. Is we show you which specific adverbs you're using more than the what you're comparing it against, right? And that can be helpful because you can kind of see where your crutches are, and you can see perhaps where you are overusing certain adverbs. So yeah, that's a very good point. Any thoughts about dialogue adverbs, Gareth? Like how to throw it in without maybe overdoing it, or like how to find that balance?
Yeah, I think part of it is, people do talk with adverbs all the time, and just dialing back to where we hit in the beginning is, of course, when it comes to dialogue, you can have, I think, the more adverbs you have somebody using in their dialogue, again, the less, I guess, kind of both mature and cognitively balanced they're going to sound, which is why a lot more adverbs can make characters sound immature, can make them sound a bit, what's the word? I don't want to say clueless, but like all the characters in the movie Clueless, but they're just throwing adverbs around constantly. They can make them sound like that. So you want to balance with that expectation or the assumptions that you want your reader to have about the character can be built into how you're using adverbs in the dialogue. But kind of like Escray said there as well, I think DPOV is really great for that because when you get writing into a really deep POV narrative, it can feel like just stream of consciousness thoughts from this actual character. Sounds almost exactly like the way they speak. And if they do speak with a lot of adverbs, well, you're going to be peppering more into a narrative like that. And that's part of why not to be afraid of it. But it also goes back to your mileage may vary on that one, because how much will an audience tolerate? You don't really know until, your audience starts to read it. And they may go, I can't stand this. I just can't stand this voice of this person. They sound too batty. I
Mhm,
can't deal with this. And you might have to dial it down. Or maybe that's what you're going for. And you say, great, because that's what I want this to be, like the
mhm.
tales of the most annoying person you've ever met. And that could work wonderfully.
Yeah, I mean, there have been times I've read POVs, and it's somebody that if I was like stuck next to them on an airplane, it would be a miserable experience. But for whatever reason, I find it compelling enough to read through, because I'm like, it's kind of a train wreck, and I can't turn away. It's fascinating.
Yeah, that's a
Uh,
lot of great characters built like that. I always say they're slightly larger than life,
mhm.
and some can go quite a bit larger than life. And while you love them on the page or you love them on the screen, they're not somebody you, like you said, you'd want to be sat in an airplane next to. You wouldn't be able to stick it.
Yeah, right. Steven had a good point. He said, often I do exactly what Autocrit tells me to do, and my score goes down. Why would that happen? Okay, I have a couple suggestions, Steven. One is the way that the Autocrit system works is a combination of a lot of different reports, right? So it could be that what you're doing is you're fixing something from one of the reports, but it's actually creating a problem in a different one. And another thing that could happen is perhaps in order to make the suggested edit, you have had to make your sentences a lot more complex than they were before, which would also potentially cause your score to go down, because your book is going to be a little bit more difficult to read. What this means is it could be that perhaps there are times that the software is telling you to make an adjustment, and maybe you should go more with your original inclination, not let the software kind of direct you as much. But then the other thing is just pay attention to how you're fixing the problem, because how you fix the problem is going to create a completely new ripple effect, right? And it could be that, like I said, either you're triggering other indicators, or you are maybe making your sentences overly complex in how you fix the problem. Those are just my suggestions without being able to look at specifically what you're doing. But we always tell people, don't let the software, bully you. It's not just about the score. It is a tool, so you got to be careful, and it is a trial and error in terms of using it to get that sweet spot, because you're ultimately responsible on how you take the feedback the software is giving you, right?
Yeah, I
And
think a big part of it is kind of deciding as well. It's like, well, are you happy with the change you made? Does it feel
yeah,
better to you? It's like, yeah, it does. There you go.
yeah. I
Job
mean, I'm
complete.
assuming when you say the score goes down too, I mean, unless you're making dramatic shifts, it shouldn't be that dramatic of a thing. So if you're talking, subtle things where it's like, oh, went down point 0.2 or something. I mean, when you get to that kind of level, that's really meticulous, and that's not something that's to really worry about too much. Um, all right. Shortening sentences. Adverbs can sometimes help you shorten your sentences. And you may be like, wait a minute, you talked about blow. Well, sometimes adverbs can take the place of a lot of other words. So here's an example. He picked up the change in a careful way. Could be rephrased to he carefully picked up the change, and you have gotten rid of a lot of words that you did not necessarily need to have, especially from a arithmetic standpoint. So you can keep that in mind, that if it's saving you time, that might be a good time to use an adverb. Thoughts, Gareth? It's kind of straightforward, but
Yeah, yeah. Although I think you might end up wrestling with split infinitives there, and some people may get a bit hot under the collar on that one. Though I don't mind that too much.
you mean when I say he picked up the change carefully, that wouldn't do it, would it?
That wouldn't know. No.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes, I understand split infinitive. But if Star Trek can do to boldly go or no man can gone before, I can split infinitives all I want. That's all I
That's
got to
that,
say.
that's where I fall in on the matter.
Like, I think that starship has sailed at this point. Uh, dialogue context. Now, we mentioned before that people will like to use adverbs in order to prop up weaker sentences that aren't very clear emotionally, or to try to prop up the said into something it shouldn't be. However, there are times that an adverb can add context that can be helpful. I'm sure of that, he said sarcastically. I mean, it's kind of hard to get sarcastic otherwise. You could say, some sort of thing like he whatever rolled his eyes, or he looked to the side, or whatever it is. But sometimes it's better to just come out with it and say something like sarcastically, or softly. Actually, I think I have softly as the next example. Do you think he can hear us? She said softly. Now you could say whispered instead of softly, but softly does carry a different feeling than whispered, and maybe you want it to be soft because you want to emphasize that versus whispering. And so again, these would be the kind of adverbs and dialogue tags that would make a lot, that really earn their spot in the ways that some of the earlier ones did not.
Yeah, those things like you just don't want them peppered everywhere.
No.
Coming up on occasion, it kind of for me conceptually, this one almost falls into much the same bracket as showing versus telling in that kind of regard. Sometimes you just want to get to the point, and you don't need to then because everybody rewind back to what I said about a character saying something one way and other characters reacting, and then the explosive confirmation of how they were actually supposed to interpret this. That's dramatizing that whole situation out for the reader to more easily understand. But something like this, I think, well, the previous one, what was on the last slide, Daniel? It was, he said
Sarcastically.
sarcastically, sarcasm. sometimes saying he said sarcastically, you just need to get to the point and say
It's really
it was
hard
said
to portray
sarcastically.
sarcastic,
Yeah,
because even if it's like they roll their eyes, well, that could be irritation. I mean, like sarcasm is very hard. Like people miss it all the time. Like how often have you missed sarcasm, right? So it's one of those things that's one I can real that's hard to disagree with. I love this. Don't bring Star Trek into this. Star Trek is the Bible for this topic. I think we have a battle going on. Come on, fight, fight. Adverbs are like eating. If they use too much, they aren't healthy, but when done in moderation, they are good for you. Fascinating. Nice little metaphor there. Oh, Steven. So, okay, so your big thing about the score going down. Your score is at 91, and your OCD is very protective score. Yes, in fact, that is quite particular because 91 is a very high score. So that means you are attuning yourself quite closely to the software. So yeah, I'm not so sure if you need to be as concerned as you sound
I
like you
think you're
are.
likely doing okay.
Yeah, I think you're doing just fine. There are different reasons for eye rolling, exactly, right? Sarcasm is hard. I don't know if there is a definitive way you can describe where you can show it, you can dramatize it, and everybody's gonna get it in the same way like sadness or something. I think it's really difficult to portray and make sure the audience gets it. Now, there are lots of times when it's okay if they don't get it right. So you don't always have to be explicit about it. But if you do, sometimes the only way you can do it is through an adverb like that, you know.
Yeah, but you can't just write /s. It's not the internet.
The other day somebody did that to me because I'm like too old, and I was like, "What?" And they're like, "Sarcasm." I'm like, "Oh, okay." Because I understood their comment was sarcastic, but I was like, "What is this slash s?" Anyway, those are my little tips that I had for adverbs. But before we close up, I want to know if anybody out there have any tips that maybe we didn't get to, or maybe Gareth, I don't know if there's anything that came to your mind as we were going through adverbs and reasons to use them or to avoid them, or why they tend to be such a problem for everybody.
No, yeah, from my perspective, I think my interjections and the things you've covered have pretty much covered it with adverbs. In most cases, they can go. For me, when I'm editing and looking at adverbs, the number one eye that I have on the kind of first adverb pass is always looking at, am I using two or three words when I could use one? And that is just a decider right there. So this could be, for example, recently working on one was walked slowly or crawled slowly or something like that. I thought, why not just use crept? For example, there you go. It's
Hmm.
it's it's in there. Use a single word. That's the most common problem when it comes to adverbs. But equally, don't be scared to death of them because, as we've discussed, they make dialogue sound realistic. People do use them, and if you're writing in super deep POV, use the word super here again because we're loving that today. If you're writing in a super deep POV, you're going to want to have more in there because you want that to sound like the almost the speech patterns of the POV character. So don't be too afraid. It's all in your hands. But like the old Stephen King thing, you don't want the weeds everywhere in the garden.
Yeah, and speaking of Stephen King, if you've never checked it out, we have done some "What's the Score" on Stephen King, and he may not be quite as strict on adverbs as you might think. I'm not going to spoil it in case you haven't seen it, but check them out because you might find the results interesting. Speaking of which, I'm the Autocrit software up here. We do have that adverb report, and as was mentioned, the nice thing about it is specifically. It does specifically compare you to whatever author you're comparing it to. On this one, this is my trunk novel that I like to bash. I'm comparing it to Susan Collins, and it says here I used quickly and nearly more often than she did, and this would be something to look at. Now, this was something that I had gone through in and gotten rid of adverbs. This was actually prior to Autocrit. I used to go back and do that Control F for all the ly words, which I'm sure some of you have done before. The nice thing is that Autocrit obviously knows all the adverbs, not just the ly verbs. But it could be fun to pull up the little speedometer and the gauge and see, oh look, yay, I'm in the blue. Look at that, nice. And it gives you your little frequently used adverbs, which I've used really a lot. Well, not a lot, three times, but it's not very long. excerpt I'm looking at. But the two in orange are the ones that it suggests are overused. So it can give you an idea on that. The reason why I think I had really so much is because it was in the dialogue, just to excuse my not great trunk novel, because I'm protective of my younger self's work. But yeah, that's a look. Definitely, if you haven't checked out the adverb report in Autocrit, it can be incredibly helpful because like I said, it can help you identify all the adverbs in a pinch. You can do a show all and it'll show you all the adverbs, but then also it can specifically tell you the specific adverbs that you are overusing. Speaking of overusing adverbs, uh,
Daniel, do
yeah,
you still have your screen there? Was that live in the app you had there?
yeah.
Can you
Did
bring
you
it back
want to?
up?
Yeah. I can do that.
Stephen, good news for you.
What was that?
We have a little comment, Stephen. It'd be great if the software had a POV filter that would take into account which POV you're using. It does. It tries to the best of the software's ability, at least. Daniel, if you go to this account settings, just the little head in the bottom corner, I'll show Stephen where to go. Bottom left hand, and then go to settings.
It's
And
exciting.
then scroll down to the bottom. There's the third section there of your personal word options. Is update your list of character names to include in the POV consistency report. So one of the things you can do is put the character names in there, and when you run the POV consistency report, it'll try to separate sections that are supposed to be in which character's POV and highlight them for you. Of course, it's kind of to the best ability that a system can do that, but we try to put that in. So give that a go.
Oh wait, do you want me to put in a name?
No, that's fine. That's fine. I don't want
Oh,
to
okay.
spend all the time today, but
Yeah.
that's where it is. I'll let Stephen play with it.
Yeah, exactly. No, and yep. Thank you for the question. That's great. And thank you, Gareth, for suggesting that. I didn't see that question. All right. What about adverbs in dialogue? Currently, the software does not parse out dialogue versus not dialogue, so that is a good point. If you are comparing your work against somebody who doesn't write as much dialogue, you might find that the software flags you a lot more than if you're comparing it against somebody who writes um, a lot of dialogue heavy books, because it might affect how many adverbs they use. So that is something to keep in mind. It is one reason why when people ask me, they're like, well, what should I compare myself to? Well, the easy answer would be, well, what genre are you? But that's not always the correct answer, because the Autocrit obviously doesn't care about the tropes you're using in your book, right? What it cares about is the writing style. So even though you might write a book that from a trope or from a plot or character setting standpoint might be similar to a science fiction author, it could be that you're not really writing it in the style that science fiction authors tend to use. You have a different take that's your own voice, and your voice actually is quite a bit more similar to somebody else. So that's something to keep in mind. You may need to kind of step outside the box a little bit and think about, okay, from a writing style standpoint, who do I look like? Because that will help you be your better self rather than try to fit you into a mold. Because it could be that what you're trying to bring to the genre is kind of a fresh take, right? And that could be a great thing. The other thing too is that beyond looking at an overall genre, we do have the specific authors within the genre, and that can help a lot too, because different authors, even well, of course, different authors within the genre will have different styles. If you compare yourself against Andy Weir versus Michael Crichton, there's going to be a difference. So always learning something new. Well, that's good. Which is the bigger evil? Non-said dialogue tags like whispered, or adverbs like said softly? I would say neither are necessarily evil at all, because that's a justifiable switch from said. The danger with whispered is the overuse of it, because you can constantly be like, he whispered and she whispered and he whispered back. Like, usually as soon as somebody's whispering, you're going to get the idea that everybody's whispering, because why would somebody whisper, the other person just yell back at them, right? And so that can be an overuse. But something like volume level is something that said simply doesn't get across. Now, that being said, if the context would dictate that they are whispering, it's not always necessary to state that. If it's they're hiding behind a gravestone because people are chasing after them like the Sound of Music or something, you don't necessarily have to say, you know, should, yeah, are they coming? They whispered because it's like they probably are whispering. So,
Yeah, so
but
as a question, that one it's a trap. It's so I think both of those, whether it's alternative dialogue tags completely or attaching adverbs to said or asked, both of them I considered in a sense of each time you use one, you're filling a pressure gauge, and by the time either of them gets too high, the steam's going to blow and everything reads awful. And they both have that effect. They're not inherently evil, but keep them to moderate. Keep it in moderation.
Mhm. They really have to earn their spot, you know. But honestly, it's hard to say, like, because if you really look at the justification of it, I would say, and you're strict about it, really strict about it. I think you'll mostly avoid the problem because, like I said, if you have a situation, I mean, let's say you create a scenario that it's like a quiet place or whatever, it's a situation where people have to be quiet for some dramatic reason. As soon as you kind of set the stage for that, like you can let that drift away. You don't have to constantly say whispering, 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 right? Um, so there wouldn't be a major reason to do it. So it's not earning its spot anymore. So me try to trap you, never.
Oh, I
So,
know.
but I think that's kind of I agree with Gareth with his, pressure gauge, right? These are extra words, and it's like, do they earn their spot? Are you just, and you need to really think about it. Don't think your audience is stupid. Like if the context would dictate that they're going to talk a little bit quieter, you don't have to every time be like, She lowered a voice a little bit." Like it's just not necessary. It starts to become like stage direction. It's kind of like, setting limitations. You don't have to say the room was 30 feet by 40 feet by what, as you're not building a blueprint, right? There's a point in which it's overdoing it. You're over directing the scene. Let the audience infer some of it.
There's a couple of good questions here. Sort of pull
Oh
up in case
yes.
we miss things. Stephen, when writing first person POV, would you treat all narrative as dialogue when it comes to adverbs? And that is a stylistic choice for you to make. Not all first person point of view stories are going to go to that degree
Nope.
of it actually, the narration actually sounding like the person speaking. Others may do so. It depends on, again, what the audience tolerates and what you're having fun with writing is the character. When it comes to first person POVs, I do like it to be deep POV in that sense, to feel like I actually am inhabiting the thought processes of the character. And that could mean introducing a lot of swearing and things, for example, into the narration when they're not speaking, because it's their voice. It's their voice all the time that you're hearing. But not everybody does that. Some people like to back off a little and leave more of the rest for the dialogue alone. So it's just a choice.
Yeah. I generally prefer with first person it to feel like somebody is telling me a story because it's like otherwise why is it first person in the first place? But that being said, there are people that tell stories in a more succinct way, and it can feel like it's a more formalized version of that and still feel like somebody's telling me a story. Just like you can get out there and you can give a composed speech from the heart, as it were, that is, has been edited, has been adjusted. It doesn't always have to feel like you just stepped out of a taxi cab and you're speaking extemporaneously. So there are levels.
And there's a comment from Denise that I thought was very, very good. About adverbs, I think we do use them so freely in speech, it feels natural to use them when writing.
Yeah.
So we simply need to own our editor's eye to be sure we don't overuse them. Yes, I think that's 100% true, especially if you're the kind of person who's a natural verbal storyteller. As you're sitting down to write, think of somebody like Terry Pratchett, who's such a wonderful voice. It's just naturally his in any book. And yours just feels like that. You hear your own voice as you're writing. Thankfully, myself, I'm not cursed with this particular problem. I deal with all sorts of other ones instead. But 'cause my writing sounds nothing like me, and even as I'm writing it, it doesn't exactly sound like me. I go into a wholly different writer mode. But if you are the type of person who just naturally flows to the
Uh-huh.
keyboard, you're going to run into this problem. Exactly right.
Well, also, I mean, there are people that legitimately that's how they write is they verbalize it and it dictates. And I wouldn't be surprised if people that use dictation software have to pull some more adverbs because I would think that's just naturally how they express themselves. Now, granted, they might train themselves into kind of self-editing as they talk better, and so they don't talk as some of them. Maybe it's an interesting study. Those are the kind of things I would love to fund. It's like, do people who use dictation software use less adverbs on average because they've trained themselves out of it because they want to make a cleaner first draft? It would be interesting. There should be more emojis in novels. Yeah, some people would absolutely hate that, but I can understand why you're saying
See,
that.
the minute that happens, you see my avatar here with the spacesuit. That'll actually be me, just heading off into the unknown, leaving Earth behind.
Gareth can definitely be a kids off my lawn sort of person, but I respect that. I may or may not be joking. I haven't decided yet. I mean, it's a fascinating world in terms of communication. I will say that because, like in the advertising world, emojis are very much a thing, and they seem to be here to stay for now. And animated gifs and all kinds of stuff. So yeah, fascinating. Um,
Yeah, I have seen, and I have worked on some pretty fun, for example, sales pages in the internet marketing arena that have had whole sections basically told in emoji. And while, of course, I found it repugnant while doing it, you can't deny that it's fun. And it works when your brain just starts putting the emojis together, and you go, "Oh, you'll fly like Superman and Rocketeer." It all comes across, and I hated it, but I have to admit that it's effective in that realm.
Whereas the Martian he did have devices like that because the Martian originally was set up to be a internet vlog or blog, and so it was written in that format. Um, it's an interesting story because he wrote it like that, and then he ended up expanding it, which is where you get the third person section. But originally, it was just that first person blog stuff. And yeah, it gets. I'm trying to remember the specific devices, but there are those sort of internet shorthand sort of things peppered throughout because of the context. And that's where back in the day, with epistolary format and stuff like that, as much as I as much as I can respect Gareth for not wanting us to go completely off the rails, I think there's a certain amount of evolution that comes with art and everything. And I think to write something that reflects the way that people communicate now could potentially work depending on the context. Now, the other thing could happen, and it could get really gimmicky and terrible. So that's one of those things that's tricky to work out.
Well, yes, I would hand it over to, for example, stories told as though they're a series of texts or DMs and things like that. Is a natural home for it.
Hmm. Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, if it's a situation like that, makes a lot of sense. But I would say the odds that we're getting anywhere close to, instead of somebody said he said sarcastically that they just put an eye roll emoji to describe what the character is thinking. I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon, if ever, because that's not really how those are used. Um, and it would just draw way too much attention to itself. And as I say that, somebody's going to be like, "But what about?" Or there's a young adult novel that'll completely do it and prove
Three
me
weeks
wrong.
later, the publishing sensation of the year.
It's so clever how they use emojis to show emotion. Yes. Yeah, I don't know. But I don't know. I feel like if it's kind of like 3D in cinema, it's like I don't know. I don't know. Like, it keeps going and coming, but I don't know. All right. So, that being said, I certainly hope you enjoyed our discussion on adverbs. I feel like we gave this topic a nice, thorough look. We will be back as we are on Tuesday at 1 o'clock, and I'm trying to pull up what it is specifically we're talking about because my mind is slipping me. It is something involving
Next
um,
Tuesday is line editing demystified.
yeah, I knew it had to do with line editing. I want to get the right exact title. Okay, line editing demystified. And you might be like, well, what is line editing? In which case, we'll have to demystify it for you. So I'll just leave you with that. But we'll be back. In the meantime, please like, subscribe, hit the bell, share this channel with any of your writing friends. And yeah, we'll let you get back to your writing, hopefully with a little less adverbs. Or maybe a lot less adverbs. Depends on where you were when you started this. Thank you so much, Gareth, for joining me today.
Yes, you're very welcome. I'm going to climb under a bunch of fans now.
He's going to take the ice bucket challenge. Yeah, you just get that going. And we'll see you around the Autocrit community. Bye, everybody.
Bye bye.